All righty. Well, while we're still having people joining us, we'll go ahead and get started with the program. It is so good to see everyone today. My name is Erin Reed, and I am the marketing manager for Polaris MEP. And we are thrilled to have you here. My job is simply to kick off today's webinar so that you'll be able to hear from the experts. So a quick couple of bits of housekeeping. Number one, this is the Zoom control bar. We are keeping everybody on mute so that we can hear questions, we can hear the conversation between the presenters. But if you've got something to share or a question that you'd like to pose, please use the chat feature. You'll find that at number 2 on your control bar. And then we'll go ahead and pass that along to our experts. I have been asked to read this disclaimer. I want to make sure that we get that out there. This presentation is provided purely for educational and informational purposes. It is not intended to constitute legal advice or create an attorney-client relationship. So if you wish to secure legal advice specific to your enterprise and circumstances in a connection with any of the topics addressed today, we encourage you to engage the counsel of your choice. So with those bits of housekeeping done, I want to make sure that I let everybody know we're seeing a lot of wonderful names that I recognize and some few. So for those of you who are new, I want to introduce you to Polaris MEP. We are the nonprofit consulting group whose sole mission it is to work with small and medium-sized Rhode Island manufacturers and help you grow, improve, and increase your profitability. One of the ways that we support growth is by connecting you to other resources within our wonderful manufacturing community here in Rhode Island. And since COVID hit, being the resource for Rhode Island manufacturers has included things as varied as helping manufacturers find PPE or even pivot to making it. We've also been very proud to sponsor, along with our co-sponsor of today's program, the Rhode Island Manufacturers Association, a variety of initiatives, publishing playbooks that had guidance around cleaning and screening. But obviously today means being a resource that connects you to the latest information in this quickly changing landscape. And that means connecting you to legal experts who can help you make sense of that shift in guidance. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Kathy Mahoney. Kathy is the Polaris MEP Center Director, and she's going to be leading today's discussion. Kathy?
Thank you, Erin. I want to welcome everyone and thank everyone for joining us today, especially Lori and Mark from Locke and Dave Chenevier from RIMA for connecting us and partnering with us on this event. Today we have Lori Basilica, who is a partner with Locke. Lori focuses her practice on advising employers in connection with employee benefits and executive compensation matters. And Mark is also a partner with Locke, and he frequently advises manufacturers and other businesses on employment matters and on issues concerning the protection of proprietary business information, including non-competition and non-solicitation agreements. Today, we're going to be talking, as Erin said, regarding some of the COVID questions, in particular related to the vaccine. So thank you, Lori and Mark, for joining us today. I'm just going to share this. So we are hosting this as a informational sharing session, and as such, we are going to have it as close to a panel as we can in this Zoom world. And we have some prepared questions for Mark and Lori that I will be asking and have it be a conversation. But please feel free to post in the chat if I don't ask anything, or if you need additional clarification to help us provide a better program for you. So I'm going to start with, can I require my employees to get the COVID vaccine regardless of their medical conditions or religious beliefs?
Good morning, or I guess now actually it is afternoon, everybody. And there are some names out there I recognize and others are new to me. So thank you all for joining in. And this is sort of the $64,000 question on everyone's mind these days as people get back to work and back to some semblance of normalcy. I understand that for big portions of the manufacturing community, people have been working all along and throughout. However, there may be places where you're bringing back even more employees when you're adding office workers who have been strictly working from home. So the short answer to the question is yes. you can require your employees to get vaccinated. But as with many things in my business, the real answer is yes, but there's always a but. And the but here is that when employees react by expressing a strong desire or feeling that they don't want to get vaccinated, you have to try to sort out people who are invoking legitimate medical or disability reasons or sincerely held religious beliefs, as opposed to people who simply are saying no because of hesitancy or politics or some desire to wait and see what happens, things of that nature. So, so first of all, can you ask for proof of vaccination? Yes, you can. However, if somebody shows you or provides you with their vaccination card or a copy of it, you should treat it like you do any other health information that you receive from an employee and keep it in a file that is maintained in confidence and not shared with others outside the necessary circle. If people come forward and say they don't want to get vaccinated, then you're going to enter into an area that's very similar that many of you may have already dealt with, where employees seek what's called reasonable accommodations for disabilities. And there's something called an interactive process that you have to go through, where you're entitled to receive some information about why, to make sure it's a valid medical or disability reason or a sincerely held religious belief. And then, provided they can clear that threshold, you can ask for documentation and you can have an interactive process about what accommodations, if any, you can make for them. Obviously, as many of you may already know, in a manufacturing environment, if somebody has a knee injury or a shoulder injury and they pick up boxes or drive a forklift, this is a simpler process, and at least it's more defined to certain physical capabilities. Here, if people are able to convince you that there is a legitimate medical or disability reason why they can't get the vaccine or don't want to have the vaccine, it's a little bit different because it involves their presence in the workplace in general. The EEOC, which is kind of the leading light on this, we provided in the notes from today a link to a very lengthy EEOC document that sort of is structured like a series of questions and answers about COVID and vaccine related information. The EEOC updated their guidance on COVID vaccination issues in the workplace just last week. And one of the things they clarified is that there are some of the reasonable accommodations that an employer can give to somebody who doesn't want to or can't get vaccinated for legitimate reasons. For instance, you can then require them to wear a mask. You can require them to work at some sort of social distance from other coworkers. You can talk about modifying or staggering shifts in order to reduce the number of people in the work area. You can require them to get periodic COVID tests. And you can talk about extending telework or work from home opportunities. I spoke to an employer several times in the last 2 weeks. It's an office-based employer, so not a manufacturer, who out of about 40 people has about 5 people who are absolutely adamant about not wanting to get the vaccine. And the employer's reaction is fair enough, but until further notice, you have to wear a mask. And they're pushing back on that too. So if you have employees that are resistant to both the vaccine and a mask, it's going to really depend on the legitimacy of their reasons and this kind of interactive discussion you're going to have with them. So that's a high level answer. I can certainly answer any or try to answer any more specific questions, but I won't go on more on that.
Thank you, Mark. So what kind of exemptions typically accompany employee vaccination programs?
Well, it depends on whether or not you're asking people to get vaccinated outside at a third party, at a CVS, at a Walgreens, at one of the state vaccination sites, or one of the local community sites, or whether you're considering having a vaccination program in your workplace. If it's the former, which is probably the most common, people getting vaccinated at pharmacies or public sites, there really aren't any exemptions other than the ones I just discussed about whether or not they cite a legitimate reason to be exempted from your requirement. If they provide you with proof of vaccination, you should keep it, as I said, along with any other confidential healthcare information. If you're considering having a vaccination program inside your workplace, and some people may have already done that, that does complicate it a bit more, because then there's going to be screening questions that are considered confidential, and you have to follow those guidelines. There is some very detailed EEOC guidance, and one of the links we'll be providing in our PDF at the end of this program about on-site vaccination programs. I certainly don't want to discourage anybody who's thinking about doing on-site vaccination programs, but sending people or encouraging people to go to off-site vaccination centers is simpler from the employer's perspective.
Great information. Now, Lori, can I get a benefit if I provide paid time off for my employees to get vaccinated?
Yes, you can. The American Rescue Act, which was passed this past March, provides tax credits to employers with fewer than 500 employees who voluntarily provide paid sick and/or family leave for leave taken by employees who are not able to work or telework due to the reasons relating to COVID-19. It's an extension of the Families First Act that was passed a year ago when COVID first started, with the emergency paid sick leave and the emergency family leave. Instead of it being mandatory as it was in the Families First, this is a voluntary type of paid leave. But if the employer provides the paid leave, which now also includes paid time off for employees to receive and recover from the COVID-19 vaccine, the employer can get a payroll tax credit up to $511 a day if the employees were given paid time off in order to receive or recover from their COVID-19 vaccine. The tax credit basically applies between April 1st, 2021 and September 30th, 2021. And, again, it's an extension of the Families First, where it's a payroll credit against the Medicare taxes, and it's fully refundable, meaning that if the employer doesn't have enough payroll tax, the Medicare tax, to recuperate or recover all of the paid time leave that they have, they'll just get a check in the mail from the government, for it. So it's a good way, if you're thinking, if you fit within the parameters and you're thinking of offering, that the employees want to take some time off in order to get a vaccine, but they don't want to use their vacation. This is another way in order to do it, and the employer can be fully reimbursed for it. So,
and the employer would just apply for this through the normal channels?
It would apply for it by the normal channels, in a sense that there's some forms that the IRS has out there, for doing it. I don't remember off the top of my head what the numbers are, the form numbers, but if anyone took advantage last year under the Families First, it's the same way of recovering the payroll tax credit as you did under the Families First paid leave.
Okay, thank you. And Mark, the state regulations currently state that if a person is vaccinated, they do not have to wear a mask inside or outside. What if our policy is that all employees wear masks and an employee who is vaccinated does not want to wear a mask?
Well, so obviously we're in a period of some evolution across the country on this right now, because the CDC has updated their guidance several times in the past month or the past several weeks to indicate now that mask wearing is tied to people's vaccination status. But in many settings, we're relying on an honor system for people to self-identify. So, if you go to the grocery store now, you probably noticed that in the last couple of weeks, the sign on the door changed from you have to wear a mask to if you're unvaccinated, we request that you wear a mask. In the workplace, as an employer, you can set reasonable conditions and expectations for your employees, provided you're not doing so in a way that interferes with their legitimate medical or disability needs or their sincerely held religious beliefs. So employers can say to employees now, coming back into the workplace or continuing in the workplace, that if they are unvaccinated, they need to wear a mask. And then the question is do they then assert legitimate medical or disability or religious reasons where they don't want to wear the mask? And then you have the same interactive process in the way. So it is going to be awkward because we're in a situation right now where we've got a lot of people that are vaccinated, but a lot of people that still aren't, and they're going to be intermingling in the workplace. And you're going to have to just continue those rules and do your best to navigate through what are legitimate reasons versus reasons that aren't legitimate, and be mindful that CDC guidance on this is going to change. The actual percentage of the adult population that is at least partially vaccinated, if not fully vaccinated, is actually a lot larger than some of the numbers you see, because some of the numbers you see most often right now are full population numbers. But if you look at only the adult population, it's actually a pretty decent percentage. But clearly there are still a lot of people who aren't, and you're going to have to navigate through that over the weeks and months ahead until or unless we get to some point where the guidelines change.
So as manufacturing companies, we have visitors, delivery people, outside guests, trainers that come in. How can a company verify that outside visitors, drivers, et cetera, are vaccinated? And can they ask for proof? Or is it the honor system that you just mentioned?
The simpler thing to probably do right now, especially as to people who are coming into your office on a short-term basis to make a delivery, is to just request that they wear a mask, because that way you don't have to engage in a big dialogue with people about whether or not they're vaccinated, and whether or not they're willing to voluntarily provide you that information, and whether their response is trustworthy. So the simplest thing is probably to do that. If you're going to have a vendor who's going to be in your space on a more long-term basis, somebody who's say repairing or doing some renovation work and is going to be in your office all day, every day for a period of days in a row, then you probably would need to and should ask about their vaccination status so that you can have a greater level of confidence about whether or not you need to require them to wear a mask while they're in the workplace. But I think for just episodic visitors, delivery people and things of that nature, the safer thing right now is just to continue to request that people wear a mask during the brief time they're in your workspace.
So what are some of the HIPAA laws related to tracking employees and visitors related to their vaccination status?
Asking one of your employees if they got vaccinated or asking to see their vaccination card is not a prohibited question. You can ask those two questions. If they provide you with a copy of the card to keep in their file, that is a document, as I said earlier, that you should keep separately in an employee file where you would keep other confidential information. Once you start getting into more detailed questions about reasons that people may assert why they don't want to get vaccinated, then you're into an interactive process, much like any other disability, and you have to move incrementally through that process and ask only enough to make the assessment. One of the links we're providing at the end of this program is from an EEOC guidance document on just generally the interactive process that occurs with any disability, but it applies here too. So I included that for people who may not have familiarity with that. And then, as I also said, if you're ever going to be engaged in any screening because you're doing a vaccination program, say in your office space, where you're going to ask people about their symptoms or exposures, that you have to treat like confidential information, healthcare information as well.
Oh, okay. So after employees have been vaccinated, can they stop practicing other preventative measures such as social distancing and wearing masks as long as everyone in the group is vaccinated?
Well, the last part is the key part. If everybody in your workplace is vaccinated, and if you know that, then it's subject to just personal choice, but otherwise the employer doesn't have any need anymore to regulate social distancing and mask wearing. Now, people may still want to be cautious because, as we all know, we hear in the news every day, we're not entirely out of the woods, but sure, that would make it simple. My guess is, though, that the number of workplaces where, except for very small ones, where an employer is going to know for sure that everybody in the workplace is vaccinated, is still going to be a minority of workplaces. Much more likely, you're going to have places where it's a combination.
And what would I do if I had one employee or a group of employees who were vaccinated and someone who wasn't, and the group of employees that were vaccinated are uncomfortable working with the employee that is unvaccinated?
Well, that's where right now the most common policy that I'm seeing, and one that has just been endorsed by the EEOC, is to tell the unvaccinated people that they have to continue to wear the mask in the office until either they get vaccinated or until the guidelines from the CDC change. And that is to protect everybody else in the workplace too. Now, if people have a segregated work area within the work environment where once they get to an office or an office area, that then they're alone and they're far apart from people, you can allow them then to take off their mask. But that's going to be both a balancing test between what your requirements of them are and the comfort level it provides to people working in the same space as them. But the most common thing is just to say, unless you're vaccinated, or unless the CDC guidelines change on a larger societal basis, if you're not vaccinated, continue to wear a mask. And everybody should, continue to practice some kind of social distancing. I know, for instance, in my office building, Lori and I work in the same building. More and more people are coming back to work now. A lot of people working in the building are vaccinated, but we're still cautious about cramming 6, 7, 8 people into an elevator, right? We're still getting in 2 at a time. So there are some things that people will take care of for themselves, I assume, but other things that the employer may want to regulate.
So Lori, as an employer, can I provide incentives to my employees to get vaccinated?
Yes, you can. And as Mark mentioned last Friday, the EEOC released guidance, updated guidance on vaccinations, including much anticipated information about vaccine incentives. So essentially, they draw a distinction, or the guidance draws a distinction on who is administering the vaccine. So if the employer is asking for proof or other documentation that the employee got the vaccine, and the vaccine was provided to the employee through the pharmacy, through a public agency, through their own healthcare provider, and not by an employer or the employer clinic or anything like that, the employer can provide any type of incentive to the employee that they want to. There's no limitations. The EEOC basically said that asking for proof of the documentation isn't a disability-related question under the ADA. It doesn't implicate the GINA, the Genetic Information Discrimination Act. So there's really no limitations on what the employer can do incentive-wise if somebody else, not the employer, provided the employee with the vaccine. If the employer is the one that's providing the vaccine, or an agent of the employer, that the employer is setting up some sort of vaccination clinic and hiring a third party in order to come and run the clinic, then the employer can offer incentives, as long as the incentive, whether it's a reward or a penalty, is not so substantial as to be coercive. According to the EEOC, an incentive that is too large could make the employees feel pressured to disclose protected medical information, and that undue pressure may violate the Americans with Disabilities Act. Unfortunately, the EEOC didn't provide any detail or examples of what may be considered substantial. But it appears that the term substantial would permit employees to offer incentives at a higher level than a de minimis amount. So that's higher than a water bottle or its equivalent, which was the standard under proposed regulations issued by the Trump administration earlier this year, which have then been withdrawn by the Biden administration when they came into power. But you should keep in mind that the higher the value of the incentive, the greater the risk that the incentive program can be seen as coercive and could be in violation of the EEOC rules. So, you know, $100 bonus or a day off to recuperate from the vaccine, or a day off just in general may be okay, but awarding a college scholarship to the employees, children probably won't make it. Unless, again, you're offering, you know, you're requiring just the proof, and then you can offer anything, including that college scholarship. So
A donut
sounds
or a
great.
donut or a beer are okay,
Yeah.
too, right?
a donut and a beer are okay. Okay. So, but if you're the one that's doing the jabbing, then you have to make sure that it's not so substantial as to be coercive. So.
Thank you both. We're approaching our time limit. Very informative information, very helpful. Is there anything I didn't ask that we should cover?
This is Mark. I mean, I guess I would just say in wrapping up that we all know, we all see the news and read the news, that we're in a very promising time right now, in that it seems like, you know, the infection rates are really low right now. The hospital numbers are way down. Things are better. There's more traffic, and everybody's getting back to work. But we're still trapped in a culture where there still is a lot of opposition and hesitancy and misinformation out there about the virus and opposition to mask wearing and whatever. So employers have to navigate carefully through disability laws and other employment laws, but at the same time, can't lose sight of the fact that it's their workplace, they're their employees, and they have the right, subject to some legal requirements, to impose reasonable guidelines and expectations for the workplace. So you have to just navigate through all that as we go through this process. And hopefully, if we're all fortunate, and if the number of people getting vaccinated continues to increase over the summer months, by the time we get into July and August and even September, we'll be in an even better place. But we're in a sort of a transition point right now.
I agree. I think that it's great seeing the numbers going down, and I think that there is still some hesitancy. And so what I'm hearing from both of you is, when in doubt, wear a mask, both as an employee and as a guest to any company. So is there any questions from the audience, Erin, that we may have missed?
I have not received anything, but if anybody's got a question that they haven't heard answered yet, please go ahead and either put in the chat, or if you'd like to go ahead and unmute yourself and pose it. We're pretty sure you guys know how to form an orderly queue, even if it is digitally. Give folks a thing. I will take this moment to once again thank Rima and Dave Chanavera for partnering with us on this program. It's been really a privilege to be able to work with the Rima team to help provide guidance to our small and medium-sized manufacturers. So the most important question that we've gotten so far, Kathy, is when will the recording be shared? Thank you, Thaddeus, for that question. We will be sending out a link to both the recording of this webinar and also to the PDF that Mark and Lori have so graciously put together with additional resource links and guidance. That should be shared out by tomorrow morning.
Yeah, and I'll just tell everybody a couple of the links that we put in there. First, we put a link to our own law firms. We're a national firm, COVID Resource Center, and that'll get you to a ton of information, but it's pretty well organized by topic and subject and questions, so you could navigate through that. The other thing that I put in there is every time the EEOC updates their guidance on anything related to COVID or vaccinations, they continue to update this very substantial set of questions and answers that they started sometime in 2020 when this all first got underway. And that information is really helpful. and is set up in a really useful Q&A way with questions and answers on individual subtopics. And then I also, as I said, included the just general guidance from the EEOC on how to interact with an employee in any circumstance when they cite a legitimate disability or religious reason, and that's general guidance to be followed here too.
Thank you, Mark. So thank you everyone for attending, and I echo Erin's comment. We were thrilled to partner with Rima and Dave Chenevier. It's always a great team effort here. And we appreciate everyone attending and taking time out from their lunch hour. Please feel free to ask us any questions. If you have anything that comes up following this session, there's my email address and telephone number. Oh, so the last 4 digits are 5498. So if anyone needs that, feel free to reach out anytime. Thank you, everyone.